I'd like to introduce you to Salomon Sebbag, who is a gabbai in our shul and has been for some years, but originated in Morocco, and he has a story to tell about his journey. So over to you, Salomon.
Thank you very much, Gillian. I'm going to share my screen straight away. So there is a little presentation. Okay, here we go.
Yes.
Okay, I'm just going to put this in presentation mode. Yeah, can you all see this?
Yes, very good.
Great, thank you very much, Gillian, for organizing this. I think it's a tremendous way to get to know everyone in the community. And you mentioned this lovely weather we have here in London. It's raining for those who are not here. It's gray, but it's not a problem. I'm going to take you to a sunny place. I'm going to take you to Morocco for a few minutes. So my presentation is entitled From Meknes to Maïdaver, and how basically a failed aliyah made me and my family come to this lovely community, South Hampstead. So let me put you in the scene for a few minutes. Picture the scene. It's the summer of 1973. It's somewhere in Morocco. It's hot. It's sunny. It's a sunny place. You have a little boy who has a great life in a white city, very sunny, with his routine, going to nursery school, drinking mint tea every afternoon after school, and being obviously spoiled by his mother and father. And suddenly, during this summer, this 5-year-old boy is taken by his parents on a journey, and it's after dark, it's night, he should be in bed by now. And it's late at night, they take a coach, doesn't know where to, and then suddenly, for the first time in his life, he sees a big plane. Very excited, but at the same time, very frightened. And he keeps wondering, why are we leaving? Where are we going? Are we escaping? And where to? So I'm sure you've guessed by now, I am the little boy. And this is obviously still very vivid in my memory. You wouldn't expect a boy to leave everything behind when you are 5 years old. But just like that, my parents left Morocco after what I'm speculating is 500 years of presence of their family, and probably more on my father's side. So let me take you to, let me explain to you this journey. What happened there and why? It's been an extraordinary 100 years in Jewish history. Obviously, we have tragic event with the Second World War and the Shoah. One of the happiest events as well, later on in 1948, the birth of the State of Israel. But all of this in the background has produced unprecedented Jewish migration across the world. The map of Jewish presence has been totally redrawn in these 100 years. Some communities have entirely collapsed and people left for other places. Morocco is one of them. And just on the side, on the bottom line, you can see today, actually, the Jewish communities are very concentrated in the world between 2 or let's say 3 countries. In Israel, mostly in the United States and France. 100 years back, we had communities which were very, very spread around the world. And Morocco was one of the big Jewish communities out there. So Jews in Morocco, the presence, I'm not a historian, but some people claim that there was Jewish presence 2,000 years ago already, with some Jewish inscription in Roman sites in Morocco already, one of them close to Meknes, my birthplace, called Volubilis. But anyway, really what I'm going to focus on is the recent years, and the Jewish life in Morocco really exploded.
No. Yes, get rid of it. I can't.
After 1492, when the Jews got expelled from Spain. And after that, in Morocco, you basically had 2 types of Jews. The Jews called the Megorashim, which comes from the word Girush, expulsion, the one who came from Spain and Portugal, and the Toshavim, which were the Jews originally from Berber and Arabic origin, who were already in Morocco. And what is really funny is that we think of all these communities as blended, but they were not blended for many, many hundred years, actually. They were almost living next to each other with different synagogues. You know, we always talk about Ashkenazim and Sephardim, but even inside Morocco, you had different type of Jews. the one coming from Spain, and the one who were already there. And they finally blended from the 18th century into one Jewish community. And we estimate that before 1948, there were around 250,000 Jews living in Morocco. Today, you have barely 2,500. So only 1% of Jews are left today. 99% have left. Complete the collapse of the community. So just a quick map. On the bottom left-hand side, if you can see the little red dot, this is where Meknes is located. So it's inside Morocco. Most people know Casablanca, Marrakesh, the famous town, but Meknes is one of the big towns as well, probably the fourth. And obviously, I'm going to take you on a journey from Morocco through to the south of France, Paris, and then London. So Meknes, where I was born, was a city of tradition and knowledge. It was an imperial city, which means the king of Morocco had a palace in Meknes. There were a few of them. There was Fez, Marrakesh, Rabat, also one of them. These were the major cities. So Meknes, I think, is the fourth biggest city from that standpoint. There was always a very strong Jewish presence, everything else being equal, obviously. It was a city full of Torah scholars and Jewish life, with dozens of synagogues, but not only like big major synagogue, like you would say, like, you know, Spanish and Portuguese or even Southampton, but a really small shtibel. I'm using the Yiddish word, obviously. You can see how the community has influenced me now. Even like in small houses, you had like small minyanim. And my father told me at some point that there were 80 synagogues in Meknes, 80, which is quite amazing given the size of the town. People used to live in what we call a mela, which is a Jewish ghetto. This is the Arabic term. There was the old mela and the new mela. And it was a way also for Jews to be obviously segregated, but at the same time protected, because Jews were always considered not like full citizens or full subject, but could be unfortunately subject to discrimination, riots from time to time. And it was important for them to be located near the palace or the police station so they could be protected. So in terms of numbers, there were around 15,000 Jews in 1947, just before the birth of the state of Israel, and only a few dozens now live there. At the bottom right, you have Bab el-Mansour, which is one of the famous landmarks of Meknes. So moving on to my father, Eli Sebbag. He was born in 1923. His father, unfortunately, passed away before his birth from illness, which is why my father was named after his own father. So he's Eli, son of Eli. His widowed mother returned to live with her father, whose name was Mordechai al-Achmi. At the time, unfortunately, not like today where you had insurance and NHS and everything. Everything was provided by your family, and your family was basically helping you. But luckily, my great-grandfather, Baba Mordechai, was a very generous man, and he took her and he raised my father. He even taught him a profession. We're going to talk about this later. It was a house full of Torah because he had 5 daughters, and all the 5 daughters got married with very learned people, if not Rabbanim. And 2 of those Rabbanim became judges in the court of Marrakesh. So in Hebrew, the title is Dayan. As I'm sure most of you know, being a rabbi is obviously a title, but when you are very learned in the Jewish law and halakha, you become a Dayan, where you can basically rule on any possible problems. And at the time in Morocco, by the way, the king allowed Jews to have their own legal system and be ruled by Rabbanim instead of having a Muslim court of law or an Arab court of law. So this was quite an important job and quite prestigious. My grandfather, so Baba Mordechai, remarried age 80, actually. He died more than 100, which was quite remarkable at the time. And he had more children, which is funny because I actually met one of his daughters. She's still alive in Israel. So you can see the difference between generations. you know, she's the daughter of my great-grandfather, and she's still alive in Israel. At the time, this sometimes happened as well with people remarrying late. So Sebbag, the family name, what does it mean? It comes from the Arabic word dyer, which means coloring materials. And some people argue that it may have been a Jewish profession because, as I'm sure some of you know, the tzitzit that we wear for the prayer should have white color, but also a blue color called techelet. So it is possible that this was typically a Jewish profession, and in any way, anything to do with schmaltes, I guess, has to be Jewish somewhere. So I'm sure you guys know that. My father was taught watchmaking by his grandfather. So he owed him, obviously, not only his education, the fact that he was surrounded by Torah all the time and synagogues and prayer, but also he thought that he needs to teach him a profession, and that's how my father became a watchmaker. And on a side note, I wanted to bring up another Salomon Sebbag, which is a famous one, who came from Morocco. This one was born in Mogador and lived in between 1783 and 1831. The reason I'm bringing him is because he was a rich merchant who actually went from Morocco to England and happened to marry the sister of Lord Moses Montefiore. And in doing so, he was smart enough to keep the name, and he founded the great Sephardi family that you all know today, the Sebbag Montefiore family. So I don't know if I'm related to him, but it would be nice if we were. That's a famous one. On my mother's side, so my mother's full name was Mathilde Mazaltov Berdugo. The Berdugo family was a very important one. She was born in 1930. Yeah, we always joke in the family that both my parents were born in January 1st. It's obviously not true because at the time they didn't declare babies when they were born. They would do that like a few years later and they completely forgot what was the birthday. They say, okay, this one was born in Purim, this one was born in Hanukkah, etc., etc. So back to Berdugo. Berdugo and Toledano were the two prominent families in Morocco. They were very, very famous. I think someone. Anyway.
It's Andrea, can you mute?
Andrea, can you put yourself on mute, please?
Thank you.
Andrea? Andrea, can you mute, please?
I think it's fine. Thank you. So the two main famous family originating from Spain were Berdugo and Toledano. So Berdugo had many different meanings. One of them is executioner or hangman, which obviously is not great in terms of family name, but some people argue that this may have been related to the activity of Shochet, who is the ritual slaughterer, and this may have originated from there. Berdugo also comes from the word, the Spanish word or Italian verde, which means green plants. This also is another explanation. And it could also be a deformation of the word Portugal in Arabic. So basically, Berdugo is definitely originating from Spain. On my father's side, it is likely that he originated from Morocco and he was probably a Toshav. So I am speculating, but it's possible that both my parents were basically the result of different communities, one who was already established in Morocco and one coming from Spain. At the bottom right-hand side, this is a family tree from the Berdugo family, which is one of the prominent, like I said. So my mother was the first daughter of a family of 8, and that was also an interesting story because on my grandparents' side, from my mother's side, my grandmother was childless for 10 years. And at the time, this was a very traditional society, and having children was extremely important. And my grandfather, Chaim, was under pressure to take another wife. And I'm sure some of you know this, but in Sephardi world, having a second wife was something which was allowed. It was legal. Only in Ashkenazi community, since Rabbeinu Meor made a change on the legal system. But my grandfather Chaim was so in love, he said, no, I'm sticking with my wife. I'm not going to take another one. He stuck with her. And he was right, because after 10 years, my mother was born. And after her, another 7 children. So it pays to be persistent. And my mother was extremely attached to her family name. Berdugo was, like I said, very prestigious. At the time, again, this was very traditional societies, and every family had some sort of standing or rating. And, you know, when you started talking about, you know, having marriages between different families, the standing of every family was very important. You could not get married with a different family without incurring the wrath of your parents or family. It was very, very difficult. Go tell that to your children today. You'll probably get laughed at. Anyway, on the funny side, my father was in love with a Jewish girl from Tangier. Tangier is a city in the northern part of Morocco, very close to Spain. And he basically ran away to see her and to meet her in Tangier, only to be chased by his mother, my grandmother. And she brought him back and say, no, you come back to Meknes and you are going to marry into your rank, like a girl from a good family. My mother, she's a Berdugo. So my parents started a family. They married in 1949. Was it a shidur? Probably, I guess, because like I said, you know, it was important to marry well and have the right family and the right person. My parents were blessed with 6 children, but after the 4th child, my mother had unfortunately heart surgery. She had a real serious issue and was medically advised not to have any more children. So my mother obviously did not listen, and 2 other children were born, my brother and myself. So in a way, I'm sort of a miracle child, because I was not supposed to be here in this world if my mother had not insisted of having more children. 18 years separate my firstborn sister, Yvonne, which I believe is here. So I say hello to her in the Zoom, and myself. In 1968, another big event in the family, 2 of my sister, Yvonne and Huguette, who is here in the chat, left Morocco to make Aliyah. And on the funny / crazy things, I first met my older sister, Huguette, at her wedding in 1978. Because she left Morocco in 1968, where I was just born. She went to Israel, and I attended her wedding 10 years later, and that's where I really have my first memory of my older sister, Huguette. This was a picture of my parents on their wedding day, you can see. So I wanted to mention these 2 verses, which were at the heart of what happened in the Moroccan community and why all these people wanted to leave. This is a verse from Parashat Nitzavim, which said basically, if God had sent you to the extreme part of the world, God will take you from there and will bring you back to your land, and it will be good for you, and it will be even better than before. This is the Zionist dream, basically, that was driving all these Jews in Morocco and other places, that the state of Israel was born, and finally, after 2,000 years of exile, it was possible to dream to go back home. So every family in Morocco had this dream somewhere in their mind. And this is what happened finally for my family in 1973. My parents decided it was time for them to leave Morocco. Since 1948, there were a lot of tensions with Arab population. Obviously, the state of Israel, the 1967 war as well. There were tension, riots sometimes. You know, it was not easy to be a Jew there, even if most of the time it was peaceful, but the tension was definitely rising. And at the same time, the yearning to go back home was growing. The king, who was one of the dovish one, I would say, in Arab country, unofficially authorized this clandestine operation. It was clandestine because it was meant not to be official that Jews were leaving for Israel, because, you know, otherwise the public outcry in Morocco and elsewhere would have been terrible. But I had read also recently in a book that the king Hassan II was already collaborating with Israel and the Mossad at the time in an official matter. And that's why my parents had to leave after dark in this operation. It felt like it was completely clandestine and were basically hiding. In fact, a lot of people were saying that they were leaving to go to Canada. They never mentioned Israel, or they were leaving to France. It was not allowed to say Israel. Even in phone conversation, people would mention that they would go up there. They would not even mention their destination. The word Israel was not to be mentioned anywhere. So we left in 1973 after dark to fly to Marseille in the south of France. And we ended up in some sort of transit camp, which you can imagine as a 5-year-old boy, you remember those places. Like, this really doesn't feel like home at all. And basically we were waiting for our turn to probably take a boat or another plane to finally go to Israel. And at the time, we were allocated a house in Israel in Kriyat Shmona, which is in the northern part of Israel. I'm going to show you that in the map. On the map here, you can see the red dot at the very top of the map of Israel is Kriyat Shmona. And my father was actually quite smart because he obviously noticed that you were within a mile of the border. And he started having second thoughts and he thought, oh, this might not be a really safe place to go right now. So he waited a little bit more in France, basically. On the left, you have a picture of 2 Moroccan Jews in Israel. This is the Mimouna celebration with the prime minister. This is just to show you that actually the Aliyah from Morocco has had a massive influence in Israel. And today the Mimouna has become a national celebration in Israel. So my dad having second thoughts. Obviously, Kriyat Shmona felt very close to the border. This was the summer of 1973. My father decided to wait in France. He joined my aunt, his aunt Mesodi, who lives in Paris. Mesodi left Algeria in 1962 in a very difficult condition because, unlike Morocco, 1962 in Algeria was a deadline. You either left the country or you were basically killed. So there was another terrible story of Jewish community having to leave everything behind, all your estate, goods, money, etc. So she settled in Paris, and that's where my father decided to stay for a while. And he actually brought all of us there, a small, tiny flat, a 1-bedroom flat, 6 people, no bathroom. This was 1973, lovely place in the center of Paris. It was difficult, but it was what it is. And then October 1973, as I'm sure you know, the Kippur War broke. And my father clearly thought this was not a good time to go to Israel and decided to completely leave behind any sort of Aliyah plan and decided to settle in Paris. At the bottom, you have a picture of General Arik Sharon and Moshe Dayan during the Kippur War. So we decided to settle in France. My parents did, and money was tight. Obviously, you can imagine that leaving Morocco, you had to sell everything to the local population who knew that, you know, there were not many buyers and everything had to be sold on the cheap. Money was tight. But one of the first decisions my parents took was that they were adamant we should go to Jewish school, which at the time was mostly private, or it was paying fee school, unlike French public school, which were free. So they took a tough decision. It was not an easy decision, but for them, this is a tribute to them as well, education was extremely important, and keeping our way of life, our Jewish values was very important. And they didn't realize at the time, but I joined a Lubavitch school. I'm not sure they knew what Lubavitch meant, but this was one of the nascent Lubavitch school in Paris, 1973. I remember being in a classroom of 8 students only, very tiny, very homey, but I learned so much in that school, partially because 50% of the curriculum was devoted to Kodesh. So from 8 in the morning to 12 o'clock, it was 100% Kodesh. And the rest was French, math, etc. It was not the best level, I would say, in terms of non-Kodesh learning, but the Kodesh learning was absolutely top-notch. My father also realized something, that coming to France, he realized that all the things he knew about being Chazan, being all the halakha he knew, all the Torah, he basically absorbed when he was a kid, made him suddenly a very learned man in France. You know, the old saying, in the kingdom of the blind, the one-eyed man is king. My father never thought of himself as a rabbi or a chazan or someone special. He was very humble, actually. But when you put him in a synagogue in Paris, he suddenly realized that he could actually lead a community and lead the service. He always felt very comfortable in his synagogue. And although he had a full-time job of watchmaker, he became chazan, and eventually he became the acting rabbi of our community back in Paris. My mother, on the other hand, was also an amazing character, a very strong character. And her message to all of us was always, put learning and studies always first. And she really pushed us very hard that learning was the only thing which mattered in life. And I think in a way, because she didn't have a chance to go to university and learn and push herself, she wanted her children to really go as far as possible. And that's really the message which resonated in my head when I was a kid. This is the facade of one of the major synagogues in Paris, the Synagogue des Tournelles, close to Bastille, where I used to go with my father when I was a kid. Beautiful synagogue if you happen to visit it. So, what do I learn from what my parents have taught me? Obviously, love to learn. I mentioned this. Love Torah and Chazanut. For us, going to the synagogue was part of life. I don't think my father ever missed a Shabbat morning service when he was obviously in good health. He always was on time, and obviously being a watchmaker, he was so precise. He would always turn up exactly on time. It can be weird for someone Sephardi, but he was always perfectly on time to shul and pretty much everything else. They taught me to love singing. I remember my parents, after our long Shabbat meal, singing our traditional Moroccan songs and going on for hours sometimes. And I used to listen to them, and I still remember those songs. It's probably why I love singing as well today. They taught me the value of hard work, obviously, and the value of money. Money was tight at the time, and it was important to make sure you spend it in the right way. So no wonder I work in a bank today, I guess. On the right-hand side, you have a lovely picture of my late parents. My mother is wearing a kaftan. This is the Arabic word for the traditional robe, I was going to say, particularly that you wear in China celebration or like really smachot. My father is wearing a regular suit on the right. And above you have a dafina, which is the traditional meal on Shabbat, which looks very much like a cholent, but this is the Sephardi way. So with my parents' strong support and encouragement to learn and push myself, I graduated from a top engineering school in Paris, and I joined JP Morgan, Paris office, which is a major American investment bank. And then in '97, I was offered a job to join their London office. And that's how I came to be in London. We first joined the Spanish and Portuguese community in Lauderdale Road. And after we moved around 2010 to Southampton community. So what is the lesson of all this journey? There's this beautiful verse in Mishle, in the proverb, which says, Rabot machashavot belev ish, va'asat Hashem hitakum. There are many thoughts in the man's heart, but God's plan will stand. Which means basically you could never make up this journey and a few decisions, my father deciding to stay in France made a completely different destiny to myself and my family. And you just cannot plan this. It's a God's plan, I guess. And so what is left of this dream of Aliyah that all these Moroccan Jews had, and particularly my parents? Well, my parents passed away in France a few years ago, within a month of each other. That was back in 2017. It's crazy that my father actually passed away literally a month after my mother passed away. They were married for 67 years together, and they clearly could not stay apart from each other for more than a month. My father, though, made sure that they would get buried in Jerusalem, and he was very smart and bought a plot in Givat Shaul 10 years before they passed away, and they are now resting in this beautiful cemetery in Givat Shaul, which most of you know, I'm sure. It's a lovely, peaceful place. The dream of Aliyah is still alive, but it's just deferred. Maybe later on in life, we will move there, or maybe the next generation. And I have put a picture of my children down there. Maybe they will do it for us. But one day, we will return to Zion. Thank you very much for listening. And I'm more than happy to hear your questions, or if you get my sister wants to add anything, please feel free.
Solomon, thank you so much. It was a fascinating story, very, very interesting. And you're obviously open to anything. Life is can take you anywhere, and you'll cope.
I'm sure Iget wants to add something.
I'd love to. I love the verse that you said. First of all, thank you very much. It was very well presented and very well done.
Thank you.
And the last verse was really, it's resonating with me. Rabot machshavot belev ish, ve'etzat Hashem takum, and it is just as well that father decided to stay in France, because going to Kiryat Shmona was not great for the family, I would imagine. I mean, I was in Israel already in 1973, just started university in Jerusalem, the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. It was a bit of a disaster because the war also broke. So a lot of our friends even didn't come back from the front. But going to settle to Kiryat Shmona was not a very good idea. So I think, yeah, thank God that maybe you decided to settle in France, because if you did in Kiryat Shmona, I don't think you'll have the same kind of trajectory. That's all I can say about that.
I was going to ask you, if I may, Huguette, do you have any vivid recollection of Meknes and your childhood that you want to share? Anything?
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm sure it'll be not very relevant, because I left Morocco at the age of 13, and at the age of 13, you obviously remember a lot. I remember the Mela, which is the second ghetto, the second shtetl, if you want. So I remember very, very clearly all the roads and where we used to go to the synagogue. The synagogue of Rabbi Baruch Toledano is still there. It is still there. I mean, it's not functional, of course, but a lot of things. I did go to Morocco in May 2018 with my sister Yvonne, who is probably listening to now. As we were going through the Mela, the shtetl, we saw a lot of local people. And those are people that Muslims, they are Arab Muslims, and they actually recognized us, that we were supposed to be people that lived there many years ago. They actually stopped us and they said to us, we remember how the Jewish community used to be here.
You haven't
And
changed.
I actually have a witness that said to us that they themselves, they were like servants of the Jewish people, but they used to keep Shabbos. They used to wear their best clothes for Shabbos, and they used to not work on Shabbos. So they adopted all the tradition of the Jewish community. Of course, today there is 2 people living in the Mela of Meknes. When his name is Shlomo Botbol. I'm not even sure if he's still alive today, but in 2018 he was. He still lives there amongst all the Muslims. And there's another one in another street. But I remember very, very clearly the whole, the shtetl, as you say.
Is it happy memories for you? Was it
Very,
happiness or?
very happy memories, I suppose, for everybody until that age, 13. At the age of 13, you start with teenagehood, which is the rebellious stage and all, but everybody can remember. I mean, I do remember. I remember my teachers, my friends that I used to play with on the street. But yeah, so of course today it all disappeared. There's only 2 Jews in there, and they are very old.
Does anybody else have any questions for Salomon?
Lawrence.
Yeah, Lawrence.
Thank you so much, Salomon. That was wonderful. How do you feel about the announcement just a few days ago, the official recognition and ties between Morocco and Israel? Is that going to make a difference to how you feel going back, or how does it affect your thoughts?
So I'm not surprised actually by that, because historically Morocco has always had some sort of unofficial relations with Israel. I mentioned the Mossad story about Morocco and the Mossad already connected in the 60s. And I don't know if you read one of the book, Rise and Kill First. He mentioned the story of Mossad being involved to help the king of Morocco eliminate his opponent, Bella.
Israel, but then they went to Israel. They didn't like it. They went to France.
So basically, I'm not surprised at all. And I think in the Arab landscape of different Arab countries.
Hold on a second, Salomon. Martin, could you mute, please?
Yes, I think he did. Thank you. So in the landscape of Arab countries, Morocco has traditionally always been sort of on the dovish side and always having some unofficial relations with Israel. So I am not surprised at all that Morocco has finally made this official. And like I said, the king at the time already allowed the Aliyah to occur in some sort of semi-official way or unofficial way. But yeah, I'm not surprised at all. And also, I think there were prominent Jews who were surrounding the king of Morocco. One of the names which pops up in my head is André Azoulay, who was one of the prime advisor and businessman of the king of Morocco. So the king of Morocco has always been very smart and realized that the Jewish community had its ways in business and could be an asset. So he entertained the relation and protected. Let me remind everyone, by the way, that in 1940, Morocco was under French protectorate and technically under Nazi rule. And technically, Jews in Morocco were very, very much in trouble. But the king of Morocco decided not to apply Vichy rules, Nazi rules to Morocco, because he said, there are no Jewish people in Morocco. All the people are my subjects. I will not make any difference. And this is how the previous king, Mohammed V, became some sort of a hero in the Jewish community. This was from 1940 until 1942, November 1942, when the Americans finally came to Morocco and they established some military base, which are there until today, by the way. And finally, Jews could finally breathe a little bit of relief. But my son, who is listening here, is intending to, Emmanuel, yeah, he's there. He's intending to write an essay on his third year in history at Bristol about the history of Jews in Morocco during the Second World War. And in fact, some of them had already to declare all their goods and money and jewelry, and they were given, and I saw the picture of the bag, they were given bags, brown bags with the swastika on it, to basically give all the jewelry to the Nazi already. So these had started. Some Jews also lost their job because of those rules, etc. It was starting to become a real issue. And if it was not for the king on one hand and the Americans who arrived in 1942, then only God knows what would have happened to the Jewish community in Morocco. We could have lost a lot more Jews, unfortunately.
Thank you very much.
Another question.
Following on from that, Solomon, Gillian and I were in Morocco a couple of times in the last 5 years, and we spoke to Jewish people there, and we were told that life is very free for them, and they're basically under protection of the king still. And we also went to the Jewish Museum. What would you say about the life of Jews in Morocco today?
So I'm not an expert of today's life, but throughout history, there are two sides to it. Let's put it this way. I think Jews were considered as a second-class citizen in a way, because, you know, they had a system, the legal system, etc. But unfortunately, from time to time, the population at large was rising against Jews. There were riots, the people got killed, unfortunately. So it was not blue sky at all. But like you said, I think the king overall, and the different kings over time, realized that it was important to preserve the order, and it was probably good for the general business as well to have a Jewish community which was thriving. And like you said, the Jewish community was considered under the protection of the king. And like I said, you know, the Mellah usually was close to the palace in a way to show that it was a special population, and it was important to that no harm should be made to them. But, you know, all being said, as you know, 99% of the Jewish community left. So there must have been reason for that. They couldn't see a future for their children there. The tension was there, and, you know, you're not talking about democratic states. Some of the prominent opposing figures was a Jew. I forgot his name, but he ended up in jail as well. So you could not speak badly about a king without risking your life. Basically, you would disappear. Some people used to disappear overnight just because they spoke badly about the king. One of the very famous prison is called Tazmamart in Morocco, where a lot of opposing figures ended up for many, many years. So all in all, I think, you know, being a kingdom is not a democracy. It's nothing to be compared with European democracy. But when I heard my parents speak about Morocco, interestingly enough, they always spoke positively, maybe in a way that fear of criticizing the king was there in their mind. And the best policy was to be quiet, to comply, and that the Jews would be fine if they did that. But I still remember when they arrived in France and they saw the equivalent of spitting images in the French TV, they were horrified. They said, could you criticize the French president on TV like this without being in trouble? Oh my God, this is crazy. And this was the culture. You had to comply and be quiet, and that's how it would be fine for you.
Thank you.
Salomon, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes,
Yeah, great. It's working now. So first of all, thank you for the great talk. I think it's a wonderful way to honor your parents as well. And judging from the results with yourself and the family, they did a great job. I was wondering, you said your dad was the acting rabbi of a synagogue in Paris. So was it Les Tournelles or was it a different one?
No. It was in the eastern side of Paris, in Bagnolet. It was, at the time, it started like a small shtibel and it became a bit bigger. But one of the issues they had was to attract a professional rabbi, and they kept looking for it. But my dad, being fluent and learned, he basically offered to do the job basically for pretty much nothing. And they said, okay, well, we don't need a rabbi really. We have this gentleman here who is very, very knowledgeable, can do all the prayers, can do Dvar Torah, he can do, unfortunately, funerals as well, and shivas, etc. So he became an acting rabbi of the synagogue until his later years.
Okay, well, yeah, very interesting. And by the way, the book you mentioned, Rise and Kill First, I'm reading it right now, and I can only warmly recommend it to everyone. It's an amazing book about all the history of the Mossad and, you know, all the things which are happening, often behind the scenes.
Yes.
Maybe we could put the name of it in the chat that the people want to get it.
Yes.
Happy
it's
to
called Rise and Kill First by Oren Bergman.
Yeah, Ronen Bergman, exactly.
Solomon, I'll ask you a trick question, which I'm often asked. That's why I'm asking you. Out of the 4 countries you mentioned, which one do you call home?
That's a tough one. That's a pretty tough one. It's an interesting one because, I mean, I forgot to mention something very important, by the way. I have 2 sisters who are psychologists, so big family, big problems, but we have the cure. We have 2 sisters who are psychologists. I believe, and this is an obvious thing to say from a psychological point, that where you come from, where you're born, and how you're raised is really the most important thing in your life. And so I would consider myself French, Jewish, with Moroccan roots. So do I feel home in London? I guess I feel more and more home in London. My children feel home in London, clearly. So my center of gravity is going toward London. But will I retire here in London? I have no idea. It will depend on my wife and children, I guess. I will follow them. Sorry, guys. Sorry, too bad for you guys, but I will follow you.
Salomon, can I?
Yes, sorry. Go ahead.
Hi. Well, wait a minute. I'm just putting the. There we are. All right. Hi. I'm very well. How are you? Lovely to see you. An absolutely fascinating talk. Elby and I we were in Marrakesh a few years ago for a religious music festival. In Fez, I beg your pardon, in Fez, for a religious music festival. And we thought we wanted to go to Meknes because we'd known a couple of people from there and we wanted to see what was left. And we went to the Batei Kvarot, we went to the cemeteries. And it was beyond dispiriting. I mean, they had been completely neglected. It was impossible to, we had a couple of names that we wanted to find. It was completely destroyed. And at some point I thought we should really put our heads together and see what can be done to rehabilitate these places, because they contain so much Jewish history, so much of our ancestry, and so many of our teachers, that at some point, you and I and a few others, let's put our heads together and start a project to restore the cemeteries of Meknes.
Norman, this is amazing what you say, because I think this is our history, our heritage. And may I cheekily mention one of your novels, The Song of Names, which just came out in Netflix. We just saw it with my wife the last few weeks, so I recommend everyone to watch it. But I really enjoyed it. The Song of Names, everyone, you should watch it. And, you know, I am so attached to my roots, as you can see, as you can hear, that, you know, something like that. My dream, and I think Huguette and Yvonne did it already. They went and then visited cemetery and Meknes recently. My dream is to go back and and see how it is, and hopefully do something like that. Yeah, maybe contribute to
Not
a
as bad as the one in Jesus.
When we're all flying and traveling again,
yes,
let's make a group. Let's make a group.
I would love to do that.
Okay? And we'll go to Meknes and we'll start the project of Shikun.
Absolutely, great mitzvah. Thank you, Norman.
Fantastic, and thank you again, Salomon.
Thank you. Marilyn?
Hi, Salomon. I'm sorry, I did miss a lot of it because I went in on the wrong Zoom code number. Anyway, sorry about that. But I just wanted to say, following on from Norman, that were we all on the group, the shul group that went to Morocco?
I missed it.
Well, that was fascinating. I don't see anybody that was on that group, and there were only about 18 of us. And we went to the cemetery in Fez. We were with Alan Hatchwell, and we found I don't know if he told you, the grave of part of his family, Ashwell, I think they're called in Moroccan. And we saw how the cemetery is run. I mean, everything is so different to our British cemeteries. But the interesting part of it was that there are still Jewish restaurants and Jewish clubs. And we ate there, and a Jewish caterer, and we went to shul on Shabbos. And I think it would be wonderful if we could get Ellie to organize another trip, and with the idea of perhaps renovating parts of it, bringing parts of it back to life. We went to the homes of some people who are still there, still running businesses there, but all very dilapidated. And it was fascinating. And maybe, Salomon, you can start encouraging another group to go. And I think it would be very interesting to go back over your routes and go spread even further than where we went.
There is such a huge Moroccan diaspora, by the way, and very, very successful people as well across the world. So that project, I'm sure, will get definitely some traction. Yes, definitely. We should go back.
Do we have any last questions?
Hey, I have a question.
Yes.
David. Can I ask a question, please, Solomon?
Yes.
I would let you know, in 1962, on the first visit, I went with my parents, my brother, sister to Israel. We went by boat from Marseille to Haifa. And on the boat were hundreds of Moroccan refugees who were going on Aliyah, they'd filled the boat up, regardless of whether it was in the interests of tourism or not. Every single place that could take a refugee was taken. This was in 1962. I think you said you left Morocco after that, 63?
73. 73.
So even in the early days, people were leaving. So when did the Aliyah start? Was it straight after 1948? Was it a period that went really for that long?
It was really a staggered Aliyah. Since 1948, that's also where the tension really started, and the fact that there was a place which we could call home, and really the Aliyah was staggered. I have an aunt which left, I think, in the 50s even, and she ended up in the northern part of Israel near Tiberias, in the Ma'abarot, those famous tents or very, very temporary accommodation. And the legend goes that she just got married, she makes Aliyah, she arrives in Israel and she sees her house, or what looks like a tent effectively, and she starts crying that she wanted to go back to Morocco. So yeah, the Aliyah was really staggered. It started 48, 50s and then 60s. My parents were somewhat one of the latter ones to leave. They didn't leave the first, clearly. But yes, it was not like in Algeria where it was 1962 game over. That's it. You have to leave. So it was really staggered.
Okay, thanks.
Solomon, I'd like to thank you very much for a very interesting morning. We've been to Morocco and enjoyed it, and we'd love to go again. So let's do it.
Yeah, let's do it. I'm completely up for it. And thank you, Gillian, for organizing this. This is an amazing way to discover everyone's life. And I'm sure everybody has such an interesting life to share. So thank you again.